Hello, welcome. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Can we test the audio? Can you let me know if you can hear me? Say something in the chat if you cannot hear me. So I guess we'll just wait for a few people to come in and we'll get started shortly. We'll give it about 5 minutes. And while we do that, we will talk a little bit about the channel as a whole, do a little bit of housekeeping. And I think some of you may have noticed that there were fewer uploads in April. So previously, I guess I was averaging about 12 to 15 video uploads, but that was without live streams in the past. So now that we're doing live streams, well, that kind of is like 3 or 4 videos anyways. So we're close to, we're a little bit under 15 videos a month. So it's probably 8 videos and 4 live streams. I don't know if you guys like live streams, but I really enjoy doing them. So we'll keep doing it for now, even though obviously the numbers are a lot less for live streams, but I enjoy doing it. And I think it helps me out anyway, at least in terms of getting presentations right, getting talking points right, and just delivering a message in one go rather than actually, you know, when I'm making a video, I have to do lots of takes to get the what I say correct, because when you're pressed for time, then you want to get the message out as succinctly as you can. So there's a place for videos, which is very informative, short pieces that I think people really should watch. And then there are these live streams where I can just ramble on for 2 hours, but also talk to the audience as well. And I guess, you know, when you have that community aspect, you need to engage with the audience. And the live stream is an easy way to do that. Whereas in videos, all I can really do is go back into the video later and then talk to people in the comments there. So a lot easier to do it this way, live. So that's why I'm doing live streams. But so today, anyways, what we're going to be doing is the Epic versus Apple versus Epic legal battle that is going on right now. That started this week, and that has been pretty amazing so far. And you know, we were expecting it to be pretty exciting, where both companies would have to reveal lots of things that the other company probably didn't want to reveal. And it's delivering so far. It's definitely delivering, and which is why I've devoted the entire show today talking about Epic versus Apple. So there are a lot of other news stories out this week. There was a news story that Cyberpunk 2077 developers, the CEOs, got like millions of dollars worth of bonuses, whereas the actual staff only got very small bonuses. And I think there was another story about Microsoft. They reduced their cuts for their PC store from 30% to 12%. So lots of big stories this week, but really this Epic versus Apple story really trumps all of them. So we're going to talk about this, and I've got loads of material. This is the biggest presentation, biggest live stream news show that I've done so far. So grab your popcorn, sit back. I know it's probably 10 p.m. in the States, so good time to like just chill out and enjoy this legal tussle. This is almost, it's not even work anymore, like well, for Epic and Apple, this is almost entertainment. So this is pretty exciting. So how are we doing for time? We've already 9 minutes in, so we'll probably get started. So let me bring up the presentation. So yeah, Epic versus Apple. And, you know, this all started 6 months ago with Epic suing Apple. And essentially, let's roll back a little bit. And I got to say, I covered this on my channel 6 months ago when nobody was watching. So that first video, I think it had about 14 views and still has about 14 views. And the one where it's Microsoft joins Epic Games to fight against Apple, that had about 80 views. So basically when nobody was watching the channel. And it's funny how far or how much things have changed in 6 months. We have 9,000 subscribers, and I would say that I get about 1,000 views roughly for news videos. So getting a little bit more views since then. But yeah, I covered this in the past, and previously I was covering a lot of different topics, trying to see like what's stuck, and it seemed as though a lot of the well, people were watching my hardware videos, so I kind of gravitated towards that. But I've always been interested in the business side of things. So today what we're focusing on is the business and the consumer aspects. The legal aspects, obviously we have to talk about because there's a legal battle, a lawsuit. But I'm not an expert at that, so we'll probably have to, if I make any mistakes, then please be a little bit lenient. Okay, so let's recap what happened last year. And, you know, last year, Epic, this is an article from Kotaku, and essentially what happened was, and I'm going to read it straight from here. In case you're just joining us, earlier today, Apple booted Fortnite from the App Store for violating its payment policy. Epic Games, the creators of Fortnite, responded quickly by filing a complaint of legal injunction against Apple. In addition to the legal struggles between the two companies, which are essentially built around a disagreement over the fact Apple takes 30% of the App Store money and Epic doesn't want to pay that, Epic Games also launched a concerted public relations campaign built around a parody of a TV ad made by Apple at least 15 to 30 years before most Fortnite players were born. They're talking about that 1984 ad from Epic, which they released immediately after they were booted off. So in a nutshell, basically what happened was back in August last year in 2020, Epic, they weren't happy with the Apple's App Store and how many rules they had on their hardware. And they wanted not to charge people 30%, or they didn't want Apple to take that 30% cut on their Fortnite in-app purchases. Fortnite is a free app, but they make money from users buying lots of in-app purchases. So because it's not a one-time payment, say like you pay $60 for a AAA game on a PS5, they were concerned that this would go on forever. And as Tim Sweeney says, Tim Sweeney is the head of Epic, he says it's an existential threat because this is something that will just go on forever, and that's probably why he felt like he needed to fight this. Anyway, so what he did next then was to offer an option for users in the app, which you're not supposed to do. It goes against the Apple terms of agreement. And he offered an option for users to bypass the Apple App Store and offered their own link to their own store, and they charge less for it. So Apple was offering $10 for in-app purchases, and Epic was offering their own option for $8. And so obviously that doesn't make sense. If you walk into a store, if you see the same product, one is $8 and one is $10, of course you're going to buy the one that is $8. So that doesn't make sense for Apple either. Anyways, so obviously Apple kicked them out of the store, and they took the Fortnite app down, and Epic Games is now retaliating, and they filed a legal injunction against Apple for taking down their app. So let me see what else. So why don't I just play that video, that 1984 video, and talk over it. As you remember, this was the 1984 ad, which is a parody of a very old ad back in 1984 when Apple released their Macintosh video. And they had a very similar ad to this, talking about the dystopian future of, say, like PCs. And they wanted to introduce that Mac was something different. And this is the Fortnite version of the ad. where they're calling Apple the dystopia. So pretty funny. Tim Sweeney is a pretty funny guy. But this was already pre-planned. So as soon as the app, or as soon as Apple kicked Epic off the YouTube channel, as soon as Apple kicked Epic off the App Store, Epic released this ad straight away. And now you're seeing the old 1984 ad from Apple back in 1984. And so we'll just wait for this to finish. And I turned the sound off because I knew I was talking over it anyway. So I think it's a really interesting case, and gamers are pretty much caught in the middle of it, especially because Fortnite is one of the, well, it's probably the biggest game out there. I don't play Fortnite, but really the gamers are stuck in the middle between, well, who is right? We don't know who is right. You're supposed to, Epic is supposed to agree to the terms of conditions, and if they did do that, then and now they're disobeying that agreement, well then obviously Epic is in the wrong. But at the same time, what's wrong with asking for a lower percentage from Apple? What's wrong with asking for a lower cut? If you're not happy with the 30% and you expect it to be lower, why can't you ask for a lower cut? And why does it have to be a non-negotiable agreement? So let me get rid of that. So as you can see, what happened there was inside the Fortnite app, Fortnite Epic silently changed their app. Actually, I don't know how you can get your app bypass. I guess you put it in, but you don't mention it, and that's how they got around this. And so they offered two payments. One is an Apple App Store payment, the regular payment, and then they offered an Epic Direct payment, which links to their website, and you can buy their V-Bucks for a discounted price, 20% less than the Apple App Store price. And as I said just before, that doesn't really make that much sense, because if you walk into a store and one thing is cheap, well, the same thing, and there are two prices, and of course you're going to buy the one that's cheaper. So why would that store allow it? So today what we're going to cover is obviously Epic versus Apple, but there are a few things here. There's the legal side of things, which obviously I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really comment on all of the legal things and I guess all of the law that's come beforehand. The best thing I can do is cite like maybe 2 lines from the Sherman Antitrust Act from 1890 or however long ago that was set up. So the legal side, if I get anything wrong with that, I apologize. But because it's a lawsuit, then of course we're going to have to talk a little bit about the legal side of things. But what I'm more interested in is a lot of the business dealings that you're going to see from a lot of the testimony that has come through, because both sides are going to, well, both sides are going to throw the book at each other, and they're going to argue for their side, and they're going to be digging up a lot of secrets, a lot of things that I think the public hasn't seen before. And that's going to reveal how businesses operate. And as somebody who's worked quite close to the top of a company, I can tell you right now that it's very different at the top to what is at the bottom. At the bottom, you're not privy to any of this information. You can imagine, like, if you're an Apple retail store, employee, you're not going to be privy to any of the internal emails that the top executives have. And a lot of what you get down at the bottom is a very different narrative than what the people at the top talk about. And now, with this legal battle, a lot of these conversations, a lot of these emails, a lot of this discussions from these top executives, from Apple, from Epic Games, you're going to be able to see that. So this is pretty exciting stuff. This is a lot of the secret stuff that we have never seen before. And so that's pretty much what I'm most interested in, because finally we get to see how these top businesses right at the top of these game companies operate. And of course, how does this all affect the consumers, the gamers themselves, because they're really stuck in the middle between Apple and Epic. So Tom Warren writes, the secrecy of the game industry is exactly what makes this trial so interesting to everyone watching on. We're getting extremely rare insight into all the secret business deals that take place behind closed doors and affect the games people love to play. And that's pretty much what I'm talking about. And you will see this in all of the emails that are about to come out that I'm going to show you. Hard drive, which is a tongue-in-cheek type of Twitter, I guess, Twitter account. He says, gamers riot in streets to ensure Epic gets better revenue sharing deal with Apple. And I think that was a pretty funny tweet. So basically, I want you guys to know my stance before we get into the rest of the information, because I think it's important to know that you don't think I'm trying to play sides or not tell you like which side I'm on while presenting the information. And there's two things really here. We have to separate the legal aspects from the moral aspects. So something is legal does not necessarily mean that something is morally better. It may just be that this is something that the court has never decided before on how to deal with this issue, and moral issues come into play. But normally, a legal issue, at least from my understanding, is something that the court decides that would benefit the rest of the society as a whole. And that's why they would have these rulings where you have courts deciding on issues, and then later on, if anything is a similar event to what's happened previously, then you rely on previous cases. And so legal issue, moral issue, are two really separate things. And when you look at this from when you look at this case from the information that's presented in the last couple of days, and also from what we know, legally, what has happened is that Epic agreed to the terms and conditions of the Apple App Store. And then they basically reneged on that. So does Epic have a legal stance when they previously agreed to the Apple App Store terms? So I would say that is a very hard case for Epic to argue, because even though I'm not a lawyer and I wouldn't know if they could win or not, but I would say, judging from the fact that they agreed to the terms, that would mean that they wouldn't be able to, at least for their Fortnite app anyway. If we're just putting their Fortnite app, and we're not talking about the rest of the Apple ecosystem, we're just talking about the Fortnite app, then it would appear that Fortnite violated the terms that Epic agreed on. So that would be how I would think that it would play out, that this is an uphill battle for Epic to win. So as a legal standpoint, Epic has a very hard case to argue for. But from a moral standpoint, what you have is, well, Epic is asking for a lower cut. And they're also asking about whether this is a walled garden type of approach and whether that's appropriate going forward. So they're asking, well, Apple has rightly, and we'll get to the chat in just a second, but Apple is asking for, Epic is asking for, asking about whether this is an open or closed hardware. And so if you have this hardware that does extremely well, Epic is saying, well, that's fine. You can sell as many hardware as you want, but we want to keep the software and the hardware distinct. So you got to let me use your hardware, and then if I can use your hardware, that I should be able to have my own rules on that hardware. So essentially, he's arguing the whole open PC approach versus the closed shop Apple iOS approach. So Apple wants to have a more closed closed ecosystem where they look after everything, but they're going to charge you for it. But on the PC, it's vastly more open-ended, and so anybody can put anything on PC, and if something goes wrong, well, then you can ask a community rather than have to ask Microsoft to do everything for you and hold your hand that way. So essentially, yeah. So my stance really is, well, yeah, why can't Epic ask for this lower 12% cuts that it seems like they're asking for? And I don't think they're just asking for 12. I think they just want to get rid of that store cut, or at least a very minimal cut that is just the cost of the running the servers to provide the services. So as you'll see, it doesn't cost 30% to run these servers. And Suls, hello, how are you? How are you going? So we're talking about the Epic versus Apple legal battle, and we've just started, so stay tuned, and we'll hopefully this stream will answer all of your questions. But in terms of getting to the chat, what will happen is, so I will go through maybe 10-15 minutes of information, then I will get back to the chat, and we'll have a break and talk about the chat, and then I will go back to my presentation. So let's start from the start. We're going to go chronological order with this Epic versus Apple legal battle that began on Monday, I believe. And so Epic Games started off because they were the one suing Apple, so that they were the plaintiff, and they wanted to put their case forward. And essentially, what they were saying was Apple has this walled garden approach with their hardware that doesn't really make a lot of sense if they're the only hardware that everyone has. So if you think about it, they end up becoming that middleman that stands in the way of the consumer versus the developer. And so Apple is standing in the middle and taking their cut every single time with every single user. And Epic doesn't feel like that's right. They're taking a cut where they feel like their cut, their 70% cut, is not enough for them to do whatever they need. Now, the thing is, that's very hard to argue because they already get the 70% cuts, and so they would probably have to reveal documents saying that that 70% is not enough and that they need more. But essentially, what we have here is one of the first things in Epic Games' presentation. So this is the Epic lawyer presenting this information. And so he's got an email from Phil Schiller, who is the vice president of Apple marketing and products. And so this is back in 2010 when they're just setting up the Apple Store. This was 2010 would probably be around the iPhone 3 era. And so this is an email from Phil Schiller, and it's really interesting because now we get to hear from these top executives. So he says, Steve, Scott, so Steve Jobs and Scott Forstall, One of our greatest advantages over Android is our online stores, iTunes Store, App Store, and soon the bookstore. I think that it would be smart to build these 3 stores as far into the iPhone OS experience as possible to push our advantage. Perhaps in a future version of the iPhone OS, these stores wouldn't look and work just like all other apps, icons that you launch, but they were permanent screens that you flick to the in the UI. They would always be there running and at a different level than regular apps. So what he's really getting at is that now he wants everybody to run through this, I guess, gateway. So everybody who has to get anything has to get it from these stores. Like there's no other way for you to get any other type of software. You have to go through this store. Therefore, then Apple will always get a cut of this. So this is Epic's argument that they have become the middleman for basically half the world. Well, I don't, actually, that's a good point, because I don't actually know how many people. I think at least in America, it could very well be like maybe 50% of the population have an Apple device. So that's a lot of people. Whether you argue that's a monopoly or not, that's still a lot of people that a developer has to go through one set of agreements for. This is an email. Oh, actually, this is the same email, but zoomed in. So I think you could pretty much see the other one. I was really just testing out the text size. Here's an email from Eddie Q, and he is the Vice President of Services, and I think previously it would have been Internet Services. He's writing to Tim Cook, and now this is past when Steve Jobs has died, and Tim Cook has taken over. And Eddie Q writes, I understand that we have tentatively decided for a discount of $100, $50 for Mac, iPad, iPhone. So that is usually their yearly discount for, I think, like Black Friday. Did we think that customers would buy significantly more if we gave them a straight discount instead of an iTunes card? If this isn't a huge difference, I think we're making a mistake. We're discounting our product instead of adding value to them. Getting customers using our stores, iTunes app and iBookstore, is one of the best things we can do to get people hooked to the ecosystem. The more people use our stores, the more likely they are to buy additional Apple products and upgrade to the latest versions. Who's going to buy a Samsung phone if they have apps, movies, etc. already purchased? They now need to spend hundreds more to get to where they are today. On a related note, our Apple stores, online and retail, are the only distributors around the world that decreased year over year in iTunes card sales. We are starting to make progress again with retail, but it's always an uphill battle. Our teams just don't get the ecosystem. We, Val, and team just heard from Jennifer that iTunes cards are not a priority for her. This is ridiculous. Who leaves Apple products once they bought apps, music, movies? I think Jennifer, the retail store, I think what they're thinking is like, well, because they own the retail store, right? Even though it's Apple's, the revenue driver back then was obviously iPhones and any iOS hardware products. So they do have a case, but Apple, they're thinking long-term about how to get people to stay. So there's a short-term and a long-term aspect to what we're talking about here. But I understand both sides. I understand what Eddie is saying, that obviously you're not going to really leave if you have a ton of stuff. And I think everybody went through this. And that's kind of surprising that this email was dated 2013, because this is 5 years after iPhone. So you would think by then they would have already figured it out. But I'm going to tell you now that a lot of people, execs, they're probably in a closed off situation where they don't hear everything, and they don't really have their ear to the ground as much as, say, like you and I, who, you know, mix with a lot of other people. I think these executives are probably all talking to each other, so they have different groups and different crowds. So, I mean, even back when I had the iPhone 3, you knew that if you bought iPhone apps, you couldn't leave. This is an email from Steve Jobs. So this is a long time ago. This is back in 2010. But It's funny, this email, because it says here 2011 holy war with Google, and a lot of these executives like to talk big about they're not very politically correct. And if anybody thought that Steve Jobs was, I see this a lot online, that Steve Jobs is like this guy who cares about his audience because he made the iPhone a great experience. Steve Jobs is two things. Steve Jobs is a incredible business person who understands the business aspect of it, which is exactly why he picked Tim Cook to be his leader after he left. And Steve Jobs is good at the technical side of things, not so much in terms of programming or anything like that, but just in terms of understanding what people really want and how to give those people what they really want. And he understood that better than people understood that themselves. This is why Blackberries were a thing back then, because people thought, oh look, I really need this for emails and business and all of that sort of thing. No, Steve says that no, because then it wouldn't be as useful as, say, if you have a generic screen where that could be anything that you wanted. And so Steve kind of understood how he could look. He was a visionary, so he could see into the future, like how it's all going to play out. But anyways, so when he says things like holy war with Google, it doesn't surprise me, because a lot of these business executives are not very politically correct. He says they want to lock customers into our ecosystem. So even back in 2010, they're thinking about ways to keep people using their iPhone, which is not exactly wrong business logic. Even if you and I disagree with that, even if you and I as consumers say that I want my freedom of choice, of course we want that. For a business person, they are probably thinking, well, how do we keep these people in our system? Now, Steve Jobs actually didn't know. Well, Steve Jobs had other thoughts back in 2008, and he actually said, also, just to make it a little clearer, we don't intend to make money off the App Store. I mean, we don't make a lot of money off iTunes, and split with the music companies about the same. So in the case of the iTunes Music Store, we give all the money to the content owners, and we're basically giving all the money to the developers here. And if that 30% of it pays for running the store, well, that would be great. But we just want to create a very efficient channel for these developers to reach every single iPhone user. So essentially back then, they were still thinking about software complementing their hardware. And they were thinking that, okay, we'll give up the software, and then, but we want to sell the hardware because we're going to make a lot of money from the hardware. And as you know, the cost of an iPhone is about 1/3 of what it goes for at retail. And so I guess the services, the cost to sell that iPhone is another 1/3, because you have to manufacture it, and then you have to sell it in stores. You have to pay for all of those stores. So that's also 1/3. And then obviously there's a lot of profit involved in it as well. There's like 30% pure profits. And that's a lot bigger than other businesses. Other businesses, like for example, Amazon runs on like about 5-10% profit. And at many years, they never actually had any profit, but they were running off the fact that their price of their shares were growing, their business was growing. So they were just banking on the fact that they were going to be the biggest retailer in America, and that they would be able to one day be profitable. But as you can see, Steve Jobs, he didn't expect the App Store to blow up the way it did, or at least he didn't expect the App Store to, that wasn't in his initial intention, to gatekeep everyone. We need to talk about in-app purchases, because that is predominantly what Fortnite is that is how Fortnite's business model is. So Fortnite is a free app, and the way they get paid is through in-app purchases of things like cosmetics and items in their store. So somebody could buy some costumes or some hats or some emotes, and then they would need to spend money on that. The actual game is free, but those little items are not. Anyway, we've got here a definition for in-app purchase. If you want to unlock features or functionality within your app, by way of example, subscriptions, in-game currencies, game levels, access to premium content, or unlocking a full version, you must use in-app purchase. So Apple is stating that if you use in-app purchases, it has to be through their store, which means that they're the gatekeeper and they get their 30% cut. And so if you try to circumvent that, if you try to do that through your own website, then they're going to ban you, at least through their standard non-negotiable agreements. Here's something super interesting, and I guess, you know, if you send an email, you're expected that, well, you're not really expected that it's going to be used against you in a court of law. I don't think Phil Schiller expected this to be used against him, and I think that's funny because we tend to write whatever we feel like in our social apps and emails, and all of this gets brought up at some point and used as evidence against people. But it says here, Phil Schiller is thinking about, about, I guess, the morality issue of whether the 70-30% split is fair and whether that can last forever, especially if they get competition in the future. So let's read this email from Phil Schiller to Eddie Q. And he says, do we think our 70-30 split will last forever? Well, I'm a staunch supporter of the 70-30 split and keeping it simple and consistent across our stores. I don't think that 70-30 will last unchanged forever. I think someday we'll see enough challenge from another platform or web-based solutions to want to adjust our model. Already Google has rolled out a web in-app purchase model at 95-5. If someday down the road we will be changing 70-30, then I think the question moves from if to when and how. I'm not suggesting we do anything differently today, only that whenever we make a change, we do it from a position of strength rather than weakness, that we use any such a change to our advantage if possible. And thinking about this long in advance can only help to look at an eventual change as an opportunity. Just as one thought, once we are making over $1 billion a year in profit from the App Store, is that enough to then think about a model where we ratchet down from 70-30 to 75-25 or even 80-20 if we can maintain a $1 billion a year run rate? I know that is controversial. I just tee it up as another way to look at the size of the business, what we want to achieve, and how we stay competitive. I think there's a lot of information there that we have to break down. Specifically, the one at the end here where he says, well, I think it'd be okay if we just had a $1 billion a year run rate. And it's funny how times have changed from 2011 to 2021, 10 years ago, when back then $1 billion run rate was considered a lot. But now it's almost as if, why stop at $1 billion? Many companies are like, well, let's just make as much money as possible. So the thinking now is like, well, of course, we want to have this 70-30 split last forever as long as we can. It's really interesting to look back at messages from 10 years ago. This is a chart that Epic Games lawyer brought up, and let me do the math for you. So if you have 70-30, and let's say it's $1 billion, so that would be $300 million going to the App Store. So what it's saying here is the operating margin percentage, so the amount of margin, which is not the cost of running the App Store. And so it says the App Store is 74.9%. Now, 74.9% of $300 million, let's just say it's $300 million, is about $220 million, 74% of that. So, and the cost of running it would be something like $80 million, right? So Epic is arguing, well, do you really need to take 220 million profits when the cost of running it is just 80 million? You can see the operating margin percentage grew in 2019, and if it continues like this, it will continue to grow. So Epic Games, they finished with, well, what is our case ultimately about? And they're comparing it to a gas station, which I sort of don't agree with the analogy, because they're saying Apple owns a gas station, or there's a gas station, and then the only way to pay is through Apple. And what Epic really wants is they want alternative payment options. So they want one that is Apple Pay, and then another which might be, say, like PayPal, and another which is Epic Games. But technically speaking, if you go to the gas station, then you could go to another gas station, but now all of the gas stations are owned by Apple. I guess that's what they're saying. But anyway, that's how they perceived their case to be. So we're going to take a quick break here. I know we've just gone for how long? We've gone for half an hour. So I feel like we've just really started in this case. So when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about Apple's side of things, and we're going to talk about Apple's opening statements. So let's take a break for a couple of minutes, and we'll be right back. All right, we're back, and let's hit the chat quickly. And normally I think I will do it before the break, but there was just the one message there. It says, Spartan, just bring back mobile. I want that colored edited style of the Apple skin. And I think ultimately gamers want this on the mobile, so I'm sure it's going to come back in some form. I think it will definitely come back on mobile, but Epic wanted to have this say. I will get to the reasons why I think Epic is doing this. Obviously, Epic, they have this debate going where they're thinking, well, this is ultimately about whether there's a closed system or an open system. Like, yes, they're arguing about the money, and it's really important that for Epic, that later on, if it's a closed system, well, they're going to be earning a lot less than they would if it was an open system. Yes, it's about how much money they make. But overall, I think for Tim Sweeney, it doesn't make sense for him that the Apple hardware is a closed system. So that's really the overall argument I think that they're trying to make, is why is this hardware, like, why is there a gatekeeper in this hardware? Because Apple has made it, therefore they get to make a cut of all of the software. I think if they make that distinction between Apple not actually making the software and Apple only making the hardware, then I think that's an easier sell. I think that's as simple as it needs to be for Epic to win this legal battle. I don't know if they're going to make it as succinct as that, because this thing is over 90 hours, which is like 3 or 4 weeks apparently. And so they're kind of just going to be bringing everything into this court case. And I think there's just going to be too much information that's get brought into this case. And then what will probably happen is the jury is going to go, well, we're just going to side with whatever the legal ramifications of this is, which is really that Epic agreed to the terms and conditions. So there's really no reason why they should have any regrets from Apple's decision to kick them out of the store. So essentially that's what's going to happen. And Epic, they didn't even ask for any money. They didn't ask for damages or anything. All they asked was for Apple to change the rules of their app store. So let's get into Apple's arguments of why Epic is wrong. Let me get into this. And this is Apple's slides here. This is from Apple's lawyers. Epic asked for a special side deal from Apple, and here's an email from Tim Sweeney where he says that he wants to create the narrative that we are benevolent. Apple would need to provide a side letter or alter its contracts. That's referring to the fact that there's a non-negotiable contract that every developer has to sign with Apple that states that Apple gets 30% cut and the developer gets 70% cut, and they have to follow all of these rules on the App Store. Otherwise, we don't agree, or otherwise we don't put your app on the App Store. So it's non-negotiable. So like you cannot ask for other terms. You cannot ask things that will that you want in your software. So, and we'll get to that later in a second. There's stuff about Microsoft streaming their games, which Apple did not allow. So I think if Epic was smart, they would argue that case. Software is separate to hardware. So Apple shouldn't be earning that cut from software. So as you know, this is effectively what Fortnite did. They offered a Epic direct payment that was an option to go to their website to get a discount for those V-Bucks. Now, Apple is arguing that their App Store is not a monopoly. They charge the same rate as everybody else, and they charge the market rate. So this is really interesting because, like, there's nothing against companies in the US and in other countries that prohibits you from becoming a monopoly. So you can be a monopoly. The issue is whether this company exhibits monopolistic practices that would prevent competition from doing what they're doing. I hope that makes sense. Essentially, what that means is if Apple, even though they're not a monopoly because there's Apple and Google have their own Android devices, you'd have to prove that Apple was in some way colluding with Android, for example, and stopping other competitors from getting into the market. So that would become monopolistic behavior if you are working with your competitors to create a monopoly. So Apple is arguing that they're not trying to become a monopoly. They just charge the same market rate as everybody else. Now, the funny thing is that not all of those other stores are a lot smaller, right? So there's a whole ton of people who are using iOS, especially in the US. It could be like about 50% of people using iOS. So they have more reach than pretty much any of the other stores. So effectively, you could say that a lot of people don't really have that much choice. Everybody is essentially the same hand phone. So if everybody has that phone, then Apple has effectively become a monopoly. Again, nothing wrong with being a monopoly, but it's the actions that you take to create monopolistic behavior that is the issue. This is a really interesting chart from Apple that says that they're being targeted by Epic because they did not target PlayStation, they did not target Xbox, because they make a lot of money from those platforms. And so they targeted Apple because Apple, they only made 7% on those iOS devices. So this is the Fortnite revenue across different platforms. And, you know, talking about the business side of things for just 1 second, we've done a lot of legal stuff. The Nintendo Switch is really interesting here. It only has 8.4%, and you would think that would be the demographic for Fortnite, but a lot of these people are actually just playing on PlayStation and Xbox. I think you get a slightly better experience on PlayStation and Xbox versus Switch because of the power of the hardware. But I was actually surprised, slightly not surprised in some ways, but slightly surprised that it was that low for Fortnite anyway. Now, the reason I say is slightly not surprised is because a lot of other third parties also don't do as well on Nintendo Switch. So there's that kind of notion that that idea that Nintendo players just buy Nintendo games. And that's kind of never going to go away, and especially with this information, that's definitely not going to go away. And you know, when you see, especially like publishers like EA, they will say things like, yeah, we want to put FIFA 21 on PlayStation and Xbox, and then the Switch will get the Legacy Edition. The Legacy Edition being that it's the same as last year's, except we're just going to do the bare minimum efforts, and we're only going to update the rosters. So you can see why these developers don't want to put effort in, because at least in the US market anyway, it appears as though that most gamers who want third-party titles want to play on PlayStation and Xbox, and a lot less people want to play on Nintendo Switch. The other thing is, like Fortnite, it wouldn't cost very much to play on Nintendo Switch either. I think the online annual membership is $20 versus PlayStation, which is like $50. So it'd be cheaper to play on Nintendo Switch. Now, Apple is saying Epic demands forced interoperability and a compulsory license on Epic's preferred terms. So essentially what Apple is saying about Epic is that you're supposed to agree to these terms of the App Store. However, Epic is like, no. These are my terms. Now I want these terms. And if you don't, I'm going to sue you, which is pretty funny because, you know, ultimately, what is a business transaction? A business transaction is where you have two sides that come together and they have something that they negotiate between the two, and they settle for that. They're happy with the price and exchange goods and services. But with this App Store, I guess a lot of developers feel that it's very one-sided. I don't think that's wrong to say that these are pretty much all Apple's terms, and if you don't like them, then you can leave. And because you have so many people using the Apple or iPhones, that you have no choice. You have no choice but to accept these terms, because if you don't, there's no other handset for you to go on. Now, here's Apple's reasoning, which I find pretty funny, but there is a small modicum of truth here. Apple lawyers are saying that iOS devices face an extraordinary threat model. I can see this, or I can see Craig Federighi getting up on stage to deliver this speech as well. He would do a really good job of it. But he says number of devices, 1.5 billion active devices, almost always on. Excuse me. Give me 1 second. And then number of opportunities, 1.8 million apps available for download, users who frequently download apps, users who engage in financial transactions. What he's saying there is that there's so many apps and so many devices out there, and these are mobile devices now, and they're always on, that he feels like, yes, they do need to have a walled garden. They need to protect their users in some way. It's not like a PC where it's stationary at home, although, you know, you have to think about, well, what about laptops? They're also mobile, but this is kind of like, you know, Apple making their argument, right? And he's saying, well, we do need to put more work into it, more than a stationary platform. The other argument that Apple is making is that there is no tie between in-app purchases. So they're saying there's no tie between an in-app purchase and your game. So they're saying if you're a user, you can still play the game. You don't have to buy those in-app purchases. Therefore, your app store is still, your app is still fine. It still works as it intends to. Therefore, it's somebody's choice to buy an in-app purchase. Therefore, we can take that 30%. Like, your app is not going to break down if you don't have in-app purchases. I don't think that can be true in all cases, because there are many cases. Let's even take Fortnite, for example. If you have an item that you need to play the game, and I don't play the game, but it could very well be that you need an axe or something to get into this game mode. Well, if you can't get that axe, then you can't actually play the game, right? Ultimately, Apple's argument is, well, everybody else is doing it too. So if you are coming at us, then you should be targeting everybody else. It's kind of like that whole speeding on the road argument. It's like when you get caught speeding, hey, well, why didn't you catch all those other people on the road? They were also speeding as well. Well, the cop is just going to say, well, I caught you speeding, so you should be fined. But here, what Apple is saying is, if Epic prevails, other integrated ecosystems will fall too. Because Apple is saying, well, Sony, Nintendo, Microsoft, they all have their own consoles, they all have their own walled gardens. There's only one shop in those PlayStations and Xboxes, so they also charge 30%. So what's the difference between them and Apple's store? Here's a message from Tim Sweeney. I know it's a massive block of text, so I'm just going to read a tiny little bit out of it. But essentially, he's talking to somebody at Samsung. He says, Google puts software downloadable outside of Google Play at a major disadvantage through technical and business measures such as scary, repetitive security pop-ups for downloaded and updated software, restrictive manufacturer and carrier agreements and dealings, Google public relations characterizing third-party software such as sources as malware, and new efforts such as Google Play Protect to outright block software obtained outside the Google Play Store. So he's getting into the fact that they can't really run it sideloaded. So people talk about how Android is also is a place where, yeah, you can load anything you want. It's an open source system. Well, it's getting more closed, and it's they're making it very difficult for sideload apps to function the way that they need to function. This is a pretty funny email that I don't often see, especially like from CEOs and things, because they're not made available to public. But Tim Sweeney, he's writing to somebody at Samsung. He's saying, "Thank you very much for all of your support for the successful Note 9 and Fortnite launch today. We are grateful for the faith Samsung has put in Epic to make this possible. You have my assurance that Epic will support Samsung 100% in any battle with Google. We will not ever give in to Google pressure to support Google Play, even if Google blocks Fortnite on Android, and even if the battle requires litigation lasting many years. Fortunately, our best defense is the love that customers have for Samsung phones, Unreal Engine, and Fortnite. Though Google has threatened us in private, they are unlikely to actually retaliate, as that would be visible to all of our customers. The industry, press, and regulators will stand firm in our partnership to advance the whole industry together." And as you can see, people are playing sides behind the closed door. So they will give that message that everything is fine. Samsung is great with Google. But actually, people are manipulating and moving chess pieces in the background. And you can see companies lining up and choosing sides between who they want to support. So you've got here that Epic will support Samsung, and Samsung, apparently, you would have assumed that Samsung would have sided with Google on anything, but it almost appears as though that Samsung and the Google relationship is a little bit fractured, so they kind of want to take advantage whenever possible. So it's really interesting, like, how this will play out, and the fact that Epic says that they will support Samsung 100% in any battle with Google. We don't even know what that battle is, so ultimately people are just playing sides. This is a really important email that I just wanted to bring up a couple of points, because this is basically what we're talking about for the entire legal battle. So this is Tim Sweeney's message to Tim Cook. This is dated June the 30th, 2020. I'll show you another message from Tim Sweeney in just a second. But this one, he's laying out why Epic is doing the things that they want to do. And I think at the time, this is June 30. Remember, Fortnite changed their app around about August sometime. So Tim Sweeney is already in that mode where he already is preparing his battle against Apple and their closed system. So number one, competing payment processing options other than Apple payments without Apple's fees. So let me start again, because so these are the things that Tim Sweeney wants to see from Apple. So number one, competing payment processing options other than Apple payments without Apple's fees in Fortnite and other Epic Games software distributed through the iOS App Store. Number two, a competing Epic Games Store app available through the iOS App Store and through direct installation that has equal access to underlying operating system features for software installation and update as the iOS App Store itself has, including the ability to install and update software as seamlessly as the iOS App Store experience. So essentially, they don't want the gatekeeping from Apple. They don't want Apple to take that 30%, but also I think they want a little bit more than that. It's not just the cut, but it's also the fact that they want their own rules. So they don't want to deal with Apple's rules. Apple make the hardware, but then they want the freedom to make whatever software that they want. And you'll see this later when we talk about the Microsoft streaming apps. Apple forbade Microsoft on the streaming apps to begin with. So it became very restrictive, and people wanted to create new and different things on these iPhones, this hardware, but they couldn't do it because Apple thought that it would threaten their own businesses. I think right there would be where Epic has their case. Not in this legal battle where Fortnite was taken off the service, but where the hardware should be open or not. That's the real battle here. So I guess this was a roundabout way for Epic to do this. I guess there was no way for Epic to challenge open hardware from a legal standpoint, and they had to do it like this through Fortnite. But I think that ultimately that's what Tim Sweeney and Epic Games are getting at. And the thing is, like, now it's kind of like Epic is demanding their own terms on Apple's store. So it's kind of like somebody coming to your house and then telling them, hey, this is what we want in your house. And this is probably pretty much Apple's reaction when he read that email. Now, at the trial, it was pretty funny. They brought out these Nintendo Switches and these PlayStation 5s and Xboxes out as evidence, and they would be asking, well, can you tell me what this is, and what is a console? So Tom Warren writes, I'm loving the questions to Tim Sweeney Epic in this Epic Games versus Apple trial. So the lawyer was asking him for definitions of all of these things, and they usually have to establish this in the court for the jury and the judge so that they can accurately define exactly what they're talking about. So what does cosmetic mean? What does avatar mean? Have you heard of in-app purchases? What does in-app purchases mean? Was there a time when Fortnite was available in the Apple App Store? Have you heard of something called the Unreal Engine? Are you familiar with the app Spotify? Are you familiar with something called a console? So that, and at one point, they asked Tim Sweeney, well, what is a game? I think it was like, what is a AAA game? Actually, no, they did ask, what is a game? They asked, and then I think Tim Sweeney came back with, well, a game is something where you have to try and achieve something. And I don't actually remember his full response, but it was pretty funny that they would even ask him, well, what is a game? Okay, so that would be Apple's argument, and ultimately Apple is saying, hey, everybody else is doing exactly the same thing we're doing, and now you're targeting us, which I don't know if that is legally that you can get away with, because you could say like, hey, everybody's going to murder somebody, but now I'm the only person that murdered someone and you're going to attack me. I don't think that's going to stand, because it's the act itself that is the issue, not whether other people did the same thing. But we'll see. Overall, I think in terms of the actual issue with Fortnite, well, Epic has a hard case there, but Epic ultimately has a reasonable case when you're talking about open hardware and closed hardware. Okay, so it doesn't seem to be too much chat at the moment, so we're going to take another quick break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the business side of things and also other information and evidence that the two sides brought up in the case. So we'll be right back in a couple of minutes, so don't go away. Okay, so we're back. So now we're going to get into some of the information that they submitted to the court. Now, let me get to this. Well, oops, there you go. I don't know how that got there. How would you define a game? The judge asked Sweeney. A game involves some kind of win or loss or progression, whether it's an individual or a social group. Game builds up to some kind of outcome or something quantifiable like a score. Which, yeah, is an okay definition, but I think it's a very close to an interactive experience. And that's pretty much how I define it, an interactive experience, because you're playing it with it in some way. If you're not playing with it, that would become a movie or a book. And I guess in some ways, a book is kind of interactive, but it's not really, because interactive in this case, I would say that you're actually using actions to change something in the game itself. And so you don't actually change anything in a book. So it's time to talk about the business aspects of this case. And when we talked about the legal aspects, I would say that that's not really what I typically cover. So I think if I made any mistakes there, then I apologize. But in terms of the business aspects, I'm a bit more comfortable talking about the business aspects because that's what this channel is. Okay, so this is Epic's review of performance and strategies. This is an internal document from Epic Games. Now, obviously, this would probably be something that the Apple lawyers picked up and submitting for evidence. Let's see what it says here. Well, it doesn't say. It says defendant. So this would be Apple. Apple is the defendant. Now, they're submitting this because they want to tell the court, well, this is actually Epic's performance. This is Epic's financial performance over the last few years. And effectively, I think they're saying that, well, you're asking for us to lower our cut, but you make a ton of money as it is. So what's the issue? You can see this first chart here is this is the daily active users. So a lot of businesses, when they, I think in the past, people thought about, well, businesses thought about it as, okay, we need to make money, or profit was the biggest reason or the biggest driver to how we decide on business strategy. And I think it has changed somewhat when you're talking about digital spaces, technology. Now, because you can reach everybody, then the game has become not so much as profit from the profit in general, because if you have, say, 10 people, then you're trying to extract that same amount of profit, or that you're trying to extract a lot of profit from each person is a lot easier if you have as many users as possible and then extract a little bit from everybody. So this chart here is about daily active users. As you can see, Epic Games, there are lots of little spikes, and those spikes are basically some actions that they put in to increase the number of users on those days. And when you have more users, that will eventuate in more revenue. So you can see, I don't know if you guys can read it, but Subnautica was the first free game, and when they basically opened the store. And previously, Fortnite would just be on an Epic Games launcher, and then I guess EGS, or the Epic Games Store, launched when Subnautica launched back in December 18. I think that's when it launched. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, as you can see there, it got over 1 million daily active users, and then every time that they released a new game or did something, you get a spike in users. So that is why they continually try to have these events or continually gave away games. And you can see it slowly grew in terms of the number of users, but it does drop steadily over time. So they can't really wait too long before they do something. Otherwise, they will just reduce to zero if they don't do anything with their store. So you have to continually update your store. You have to continually give out free stuff and continually do this to grow the store so that you get to a number of users where people just come back automatically, say like Steam, for example. You can see that when they gave away Batman, I think this is the Batman trilogy, it spiked to 5 million users. I don't know why Batman was so popular, but that's a lot of people compared to all of the other promotions that they did. Now this ties directly into the revenue of the store. So you can see when Borderlands 3 launched, and because that was an exclusive to the store, when Borderlands 3 launched, then that had a massive spike because that wasn't actually a free game. You had to pay $60 to buy that game. So you can see the daily revenue shot up when Borderlands 3 launched. Now, Daniel Ahmad writes, we now know Epic Games revenue for the past 3 years thanks to court documents. 2018 was 5.7 billion, 2019 was 4.2 billion, 2020 5.1 billion. 97% of 2018 revenue was Fortnite, 88% in 2019. That's really interesting because you can see that the Epic Game Store is making a little bit of a dent into the amount of revenue. So 88% of 4.2 billion. So what's that? So about 400 million, I would say, came from the Epic Game Store or other sources of revenue. So it could be things like grants or investments from other companies. For example, Sony gave Epic $250 million in 2020 at the end of 2020. So it can be many things. But at the moment, Tim Sweeney says that the Epic Game Store is not profitable at the moment, but it will be maybe about 4 or 5 years later down the track. Now, the reason why the Apple lawyers are establishing this is saying, well, they make a lot of money anyway, so why are they asking for an extra like 18%, or why are they asking for us to lower our cut? If you ever wanted to know how they do those Epic Games free games deals with the publishers, well, all of this information was brought up in this trial. So if anything, now you get to know how these developers make their deals, especially when it comes to these free games that they give out on this Epic Game Store. I would imagine that Game Pass operates in a very similar fashion as well. I would say that, obviously every game is different, as Phil Spencer said, but I would say in the end, it's basically about user acquisition cost. So the number, so for EGS, they have a column here which says new Epic Game accounts and Epic user acquisition costs. So they want to buy new gamers. And so Tim Sweeney said, you have to buy in, right? Like if you come late to the party, you have to buy in and take people from other stores to your store. So what he's talking about there is Steam. Steam is already the leader in PC gaming, and so to remove users from Steam, they have to pay to get those users to come out of Steam and into their Epic Game Store. Now Fortnite did that without having to actually pay for any of these users. By the way, I think Fortnite is at about like 100 million users overall. I don't know, 150 million users overall on PlayStation, Xbox, all of the platforms, but on PC, if we go back to that other chart where it says the revenue was about 7 or 8% for PC, that would probably equate to maybe about 10 to 15 million players on PC. So there could be like maybe 10, 15 million people on the Epic Games Store. And so what they're doing with these free games is that they want to drive more people to use their store. The funny thing is, like, there hasn't really been a good time to talk about the Epic Games Store because not a lot has happened and there's not that many people on it. So it's like, well, why make a video on it? I did think about making a video when they announced that Total War Troy was going to be coming for free. But then I was a bit late to that, so I only had a couple of days left and I decided, okay, well, there's no point to make that video because it'll be outdated by the time I make it. But anyways, as you can see, the Epic user acquisition cost is around like $1, $2 for most of these titles. So they're paying these developers for their game. For Subnautica, they pay $1.4 million. Now, Subnautica, I believe, has about 20 people, or it's a very small studio. So if you can see that 1.4 million divided by 20 is about $70,000 each. That's not actually a whole lot in terms of salaries and things for this studio of 20, maybe 50 people. Of course, they made a lot of their money on Steam already, being a independent title on Steam. So they would have made a lot of money anyway, but 1.4 million definitely helps for Subnautica. We're not talking about big dollars here in terms of companies, even though when you see this, 1.4 million sounds like a lot. When you have to divide it up into all these salaries, it's not really that much. But they got 800,000 Epic accounts, which meant that Epic basically paid $1.74 for each account. And so that's pretty much what they did for all of these games. And I think they're trying to pick carefully the cheapest, I guess, the most value that they can possibly get. So something like a Super Meat Boy, a lot of people knew about that game and wanted to get it for free, which drove 97,000 new accounts, but they only paid $50,000 for the game. So the Epic user acquisition cost is 52 cents. So all of these games, they're thinking about how do we get more users for as low cost as possible, and that's why you're getting that game. That's why we got that Grand Theft Auto 5 last year's Civilization 6, and we'll get to that in just a second. But you can access this from, I will leave a link in the description later below where all of these documents reside. But essentially, this is a lot of interesting information into what a game is actually worth, and obviously they can continue selling on other platforms. So really, Epic is really just paying for 50 cents per. Well, actually, there's 1.7 million entitlements. So what's that? Let's do the math on that. So, Super Meat Boy, it was downloaded 1.7 million times, but they only paid 50,000 for it. Whoops, I have to do it the other way. So for Super Meat Boy or Team Meat, they only got 2.9 cents a copy. Now, Grand Theft Auto and Civilization would obviously be a bit different, and I'll show you in a second how much they get paid. So let me get back to this. So this is another slide from the Epic Games performance review. So this is how a deal breaks down. And Epic was going to pay the developers of Borderlands 3, which is Gearbox, $80 million up front. So this is the Borderlands 3 minimum guarantee. They're going to pay Gearbox $80 million no matter what. If it sold one copy, they're going to pay them $80 million. However, they were going to recoup that first $80 million. So that $80 million, Epic was going to get 100% of that value. It was not going to be 88 to 12% cut. Now, Borderlands 3 marketing commitment, this is basically just like some fees that they were going to pay to do the transaction, negotiate the deal. You can call it a transaction fee if you want. Or marketing commitment is like, yeah, so you put a whole bunch of ads on your store. Maybe you'll do it on different places around the internet. Say like you might put some ads on IGN saying, hey, Borderlands 3 exclusive, blah, blah, blah. They're going to commit $15 million to marketing. And Borderlands 3 non-recoupable fees, that's the transaction fees, sorry. So there's 20 million there, but essentially $35 million of fees that they were going to pay Gearbox as well. So that ended up being $115. And they also threw in the Handsome Collection, which was $1 million, $11 million, and Civilization 6, which was $20 million. Now that's really interesting because let's say there are about 15, 20 million people or accounts. Well, you'd expect that most accounts are going to download Civilization. So you're really just paying $2K $1 per title. But for 2K, maybe they decided, well, that's okay because we're just giving people the base game. There's still lots of DLC and still lots of expansion packs for people to purchase. So we'll make our money that way through all of these new accounts. So they've really reduce the amount of value. And one of the things is like maybe this 20 million is like 20 million that they would never see because these 20 million people, they were never going to buy it anyway. So this is 20 million that they essentially probably wouldn't have seen. Maybe these people just pirate the game, but now they don't have to pirate the game because it's on Epic Games Store. So altogether, the full deal is 146 million. And there's just some other information on the right-hand side there. But essentially, after that $80 million minimum guarantee, then it reverts back to that 88-12% rule. So after 80 million, then Epic would just get 12% of the rest of the sales after that, and the developer would get 88%. And it says that after that, the net revenue contribution was 9.2 million. So Epic Games Store says that Borderlands 3 made them $9.2 million. This is a really interesting table that shows, once again, this user acquisition cost. And I might be in the way of it. I'm just having a look now. I'll try and sit on the side like this and spin around a little bit like this if I'm still in the shot. But essentially, Facebook has the most number of people unexpectedly of any of the social platforms. So there's 2.4 million active users on their platform, and they spend about $465 billion. So that's the revenue, $465 billion. Now, if you divide that up, each person ultimately spends $2 on Facebook, which is actually quite a lot, given that I would expect that not that many people would actually spend money. But this would also be the ad revenue that Facebook generates through having 2.4 billion people. So I think that's not a bad amount. Tencent only drives $1.2 per person. So they have a bit of work to do, I guess. But at the same time, Tencent only has 1.1 billion user base, which actually is surprising given that most of their, I would have to imagine like 95% of their audience would be in China. And China has maybe about 1.3 billion people. So basically everybody is running off some sort of system where Tencent is the gatekeeper in China. Now, the model that everybody wants to go to is the Netflix model, and as you can see why, it's $9.50 per user. So everybody on that system pays to pay a subscription, which when you think about it, right, how much they charge per subscription? They probably charge about $10 for the most basic one, $20 a month for the higher tiered ones where, you know, you get like a couple of devices that you can use or a couple of accounts. But even still, some of the ones with multiple accounts, you can divide that up again. So like we have a account where you have 4 accounts we have a subscription where you have 4 accounts, so that could be like $5 a month instead. So I think they're doing pretty well, that they're averaging about $9 per user for Netflix. This is the model that everybody is seeing, that everybody wants to go to. And Epic Games is about $4 per user right now. And most of that really is down to Fortnite. I would say that, or even Tim Sweeney said that only 7% of users actually buy games on Epic Games Store. And I would say that in Steam, there would be a lot more people that buy games than Epic Games Store. So that's where they want to go. I don't know if you can read this because the color was supposed to be different to what it is here. But I will just quickly read this for you. This is from Mark Rain, which is the vice president at Epic. Today we pay Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo 30% because they subsidize the hardware and do a lot of marketing for us. Last I heard, Google's Stadia business model is 30% of game purchases with no monthly charge to users. They don't currently accommodate free-to-play games, but said that they would consider Fortnite under some model where you buy X amount of V-Bucks to get Y months worth of service, and they would take their 30% cut and promote the game like Microsoft and Sony do. Mark Rain from Epic, he's basically talking about, well, the Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo model is different to the iOS model. The Sony model is that they have a lot less users, so they need to charge 30% to make their money back because they don't make any money off their hardware. This is some internal emails from Mark Rain and Tim Sweeney. This is from the plaintiff, or information submitted by the plaintiff, which is Epic. And basically they just wanted to highlight the fact that they tried to talk to Apple. So it says here from Tim Sweeney, he says, with a Mark, if we're able to book a future brainstorming meeting with Apple, I'd love to get 30 minutes booked with Joswiak to talk about the potential for iOS and future Apple things to operate as open platforms. Background, with a rigorous OS security model in place and app signature revocation support, Apple could completely decouple its quality content and editorial decisions on the App Store from the separate issue of whether a user has the right to install a given program on their device. If the App Store were merely the premier way for consumers to install software, not the sole way, then Apple could curate higher quality software overall without acting as a censor on free expression and commerce on the platform that takes the form of software. Once again, Tim's talking about open and closed there. Mark Rain says, I just finished talking to Tim Kirby. He said he'd check on dates on his end to get this meeting set up and general meetings with you, Kim and I, and the various other teams at Apple. Also, we should definitely take FNBR on iOS to show them, Fortnite Battle Royale on iOS to show them. We talked quite a bit about it. This is all the way back in 2018, so way before Tim Sweeney and this Fortnite, or they made changes to Fortnite, which would take them off the Apple App Store. That was in 2020. This is 2 years before that. By the way, he was definitely receptive to the idea, which doesn't mean it will go anywhere, but it means he'll line up people who will listen and not shoot it down like Phil Schiller would. He says they would have had internal discussion about this sort of thing, so having you in a conversation about it, even if it's a one-way conversation to start, would be useful. It's funny. It's basically software developers asking for the hardware to be opened up, but the hardware developers know that they will lose a lot of money and they will lose their competitive or edge if they continue to be closed. This is something that nobody's ever challenged Apple on, and finally, all of this has brought forth to a legal case, which kind of the wrong case to bring it up on, about whether Fortnite should be taken off. But I guess they've kind of found a way to at least bring it up in a public light. This is a hilarious email from Tim Cook and also Tim Sweeney. So Tim Sweeney, this is This is actually in 2015, so this is a long time ago. So Tim has been thinking about this for a long time. I thought this was in 2020, but obviously it's 2015. Tim Sweeney back then, he says, y'all should think about separating iOS App Store curation from compliance review and app distribution. The App Store has done much good for the industry, but it doesn't seem tenable for Apple to be the sole arbiter of expression and commerce over an app platform approaching 1 billion users. So it's funny that Tim Cook didn't know who Tim Sweeney was from Epic Games. You know, I was playing Epic Games all the way back when we had Jazz Jackrabbit back in the 90s. And back then, you would know everybody. You would know all of the developers, who did what. There weren't very many games out back then. You know, it could have been like, say, like 100, maybe 200 games out at the time. A lot of shareware being thrown around. Not very many developers, not like it is now. So it's funny because like Tim Sweeney has been there the whole time. It would be like somebody saying, hey, who's John Carmack? So maybe Tim was just being a little bit facetious when he says, is this that guy that was at one of our rehearsals? I thought this was pretty funny. Maybe he just did it because he started the email with y'all. Okay. Tom Warren says, now we're going to move to cross-play and cross-wallet and all of those issues, which brings Sony into the conversation. Tom Warren says, this is an email from Sony to Epic Games in 2018 dismissing the idea of cross-play for Fortnite. Epic Games have pitched cross-play announced with Sony where Epic goes out of its way to make Sony look like heroes. Now, I didn't include those emails, but the one on the left is basically the Gio Corsi from the senior director at Sony America. He kind of felt like it was not a slam dunk to do crossplay. And you have to think about it from his situation where Sony 2018, they were looking at, well, they were killing the Xbox basically. And most people were playing on the PlayStation because they sold the most number of hardware. They had about 60 million people, or 60 million sales of hardware compared to maybe something like 20 to 30 million people playing on the Xbox. So he was wondering, well, how does crossplay actually help Sony in this instance? And, you know, that's kind of like that wouldn't be my take on it, because I would just be like, hey, the more people that we can get playing, the better it is. So even if it is crossplay, that would be much better. You would get better competition. Maybe Sony's issue would be like, hey, what if all of these Xbox users end up beating the Sony users because they have better control sticks or better controllers? We wouldn't be able to stop that. So there's probably a lot of micro issues that they have to manage. But I think the general concept of crossplay would actually increase the number of users, would increase the number of people playing on Sony and also on Xbox. Sony was more worried about how there would be more users playing from Xbox as a result of crossplay rather than Sony, and they didn't want to help the competition. Hello, Fallen One is rising. Hello, how are you? So we'll get to the chat in a little bit. I hope you don't mind. But we'll have breaks every once in a while. And so we'll just keep continuing with this presentation, this live stream about Epic and Apple. So anyway, back to what I was talking about. So Sony didn't think it was a slam dunk to do crossplay. And obviously, it's easy for Epic Games to say crossplay is great because that would just get more people playing. It was their game. So it didn't matter like if you were playing on Sony on a PlayStation or an Xbox, it was all the same for Epic. From Sony's point of view, they felt like they had to be more protective because they didn't want to help Xbox. So then they came up with this concept where they had the cross-platform revenue share, which honestly, to me, it sounds extremely petty because you're talking about micro amounts when you're the leader anyway. So PlayStation were uncomfortable that they would lose out on revenue to, say, Xbox. So if you could do crossplay on both, and you could, so they were worried about losing their friends to Xbox rather than what they would gain, because right now, if PlayStation was the leader, if they have 60 million units out there, they expected that people would naturally gravitate to them because they have a bigger base, bigger install base. So if you're on Xbox, they were like, well, maybe I will just go and buy a PS4 anyway, because then I get to play with a bigger install base, and there'd be more games, more matches. So that was their concept. And having crossplay would actually stop that, because then now people on Xbox would be like, well, I don't have to move to a PlayStation anymore because now I have crossplay. So there's this idea from PlayStation that, okay, we'll allow crossplay, but we don't want to lose out on any of our revenue, because if they continue to not allow crossplay while Xbox and Nintendo allow crossplay, that kind of made them look like the bad guys. So they were kind of forced to have crossplay. And that is why we have competition, because it will drive other competitors to better outcomes for consumers. So now they had this deal where, okay, the gameplay share needs to be at the same amounts as the revenue share. Gameplay is, I guess, the amount of time that people put into playing Fortnite, and it needs to be the same. If it's less than that, if it's like 0.85, then Epic Games has to pay a royalty to offset the reduction in revenue. So it's not exactly quite clear like how they measure all of this stuff, but essentially they were basically saying, hey, we need you to pay, like, I don't know how much it is, I think it's about 15% penalty, if you can call it that, if more people start to play on Xbox, which is pretty petty when you think about it. Tom Warren says, Sony really hated PS4 crossplay. New confidential documents and emails reveal these provide a rare glimpse at how Sony fought to block crossplay a few years ago. So because of all of this, Epic CEO Tim Sweeney just confirmed that Sony is the only platform holder that requires Epic to pay compensation for crossplay. Epic had to agree to pay these additional fees to enable crossplay in Fortnite. So the point is, out of all of this, is the Apple lawyers are arguing, hey, you are paying Sony to allow for crossplay, whereas we have allowed that on our platform. So why is it okay for you to pay these fees to Sony? Now, all these companies have their special relationships where, they grease their palms a little, and then they're like, well, we'll allow this thing to happen. We won't mind so much if you do this, even though it goes against what we're trying to do. So little small things, right? But essentially, Apple was really arguing, hey, why are you paying? You should be also against these fees, these cross-platform fees as well. So this is a email from Phil Spencer, and I wanted to bring this up because this highlights, I guess, what I thought about Phil Spencer for a long time, and I think you'll see that most of the time, people will present in one way outwardly in their promotional and marketing material. They may be a different person in behind camera. And so for Phil Spencer, I always thought he was a pretty genuine guy. And obviously it's very hard to tell, like, well, who's genuine and who's not when people get up onto stage at E3, how you're supposed to tell from that. But from a lot of the interviews, he's been saying all of the right things. So surely it couldn't possibly he couldn't keep up that act for as long as, he's been doing, he's been with Microsoft for a very long time anyway. So he's been with Microsoft all the way from the start. Even back when they released their first Xbox, he was right there. So this email says, congrats on the success with Fortnite. I'd love to be a great platform and service for Fortnite, allowing you to reach maximum potential for the game across all devices. I was aware the team was there today, and I instructed them to be supportive of your asks. The stickiest of the issues is cross-purchase. I think it's solvable, so I'm not saying this is a blocker, but we do need to work through the scenario with you. You know this, but it's worth stating that compared to PCs and phones, consoles are a very subsidized hardware device. That subsidy obviously relies on software and service sales to recoup the customer acquisition costs of the console, just like we wanted to support and did moving Fortnite to free-to-play for the Battle Royale mode. I want to support here a scenario where a free-to-play Fortnite on Xbox results in our digital stores price for Fortnite items being non-competitively priced relative to other cross-purchase platforms is an issue we need to mitigate. He's talking about arbitrage there. So that's when one platform is much cheaper than another platform, and then everybody gravitates toward that other store. So they want to avoid that as much as possible. That's why you see when the price of goods are the same in many different stores. So a lot of retailers want to avoid the fact that, hey, you can't offer something much cheaper over there. No one's going to come to my retail store. But I won't read the rest of it, but it is interesting to see that his persona is very much the same in his emails to these emails that were not supposed to be seen by other people, and to executives as well. And I think this is why I've been saying that Phil Spencer, I mean, out of all of the people that are running these top gaming companies, I think at least Phil Spencer, even if he's doing, I guess, the corporate things that Microsoft asks him to do, I think there is a part of him that is at least fairly genuine about gaming. This is another email from Phil Spencer, and I just brought this up because this is August 6, 2020, which is about the time when Phil Spencer was probably working on the Xbox Series X, and it's a couple of months from launch. He says, I owe you a bunch of things and I'm behind. I apologize for that. Just a lot going on, but that's not an excuse. You've obviously seen our Samsung announce now our back and forth with Apple at the highest levels of MS. We are committed to pushing on these policies and continuing to expand our console platform's capabilities. You can chime in as you feel comfortable. But I did want to just let you know that I have your point on xCloud on other consoles. Having given up free to play outside of gold, we will get there, and I want to partner with you. And our store entitlement ideas as items I'm going to review with you to make progress. I'm committed to that just behind. So already, this is 8 months ago, and we just got this announced that free-to-play was going to be outside of Gold, Xbox Live Gold. So previously, all their free-to-play games were locked behind Xbox Live Gold. You had to pay a $50 membership, and even as early as like a year ago, they were talking about, well, we really need to open this up because people are moving away from a model of profit to a model of user acquisition, and this is the best way to do it. Get more people to play in as many free things as possible and drive as many people to your store, and in that case, after that, then with so many people, then you will continually get that revenue, just like a Facebook or Netflix and that type of business. And that's not necessarily I agree with all of this. I'm just telling you how it is that the business mindset or the business thinking behind all of that. So it's not necessarily how I would run it. Anyway, Tim Sweeney writes, totally understood. I gather there's a lot going on at Microsoft nowadays. Anyway, you'll enjoy the upcoming fireworks show. So obviously he's talking about Fortnite going to be banned, but Phil doesn't know, and Tim's obviously not saying it because it hasn't been done yet. Now this is a tweet from just recently, which is a bit outside of this Epic versus Apple battle, but Microsoft has also gone to a 12% cut on the PC platform. So that's good news for PC gamers. Now, I know a lot of people have been arguing with me in my Discord channels about stuff, and so they've been saying, oh, well, you won't, the gamer or the consumer is not going to get to see a cut of this discount anyways. It's all going to go to the developer. This 70 to 88% is just all going to go to the developer anyway. So what's the point? Like, I'd rather give that back to Apple or Microsoft so that they can provide me a better experience. And I just don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all, because essentially you're kind of going into bat for the corporation then at that point. And the question really needs to be asked is, well, how do you know that Apple needs that 30%, or how do you know Microsoft needs that 30%? They're the ones that take the money. So if they can agree to give just 12%, well, then you should expect that they can do so. You shouldn't have to worry that they need that extra 18% to run their business, because I think they would know if they could or not. And as we showed previously in one of the charts, well, the operating margin for the Apple App Store is 77%. So the costs to run the Apple App Store is about 22% of their 30%. 22% of that 30% cut, which is about 8% overall. So it only costs them about 8% to run rather than 30% to run, which is why Microsoft is going with 12%. It gives them about 4 to 5% of profits from running that store. So once again, Microsoft going to 12%, so their running costs would probably be around 8% once it gets to a state where it's comfortably making money, or into a state where they think it's at a good level. So 12%, they think 12% is a reasonable amount to take. And so that's going to be 8% running costs and maybe about 4 to 5% of profits. So there are a few other tweets that we wanted to go through here. And this is from all of the day 2 action. So previously what I talked about was all of the day 1 stuff. And we'll just go through this very quickly, because I guess a lot of this is just tweets, and there wasn't a whole lot of evidence that was presented on day 2. So we'll just talk a little bit about what happened in the trial. So Adi Robertson and also Tom Warren, they've been live tweeting about this legal case. So if you want to follow them daily, make sure to go and check those Twitter accounts out. So here on the first, at the start of day 2, Adi said, "Now we're calling Epic CEO Tim Sweeney back to the stand for cross-examination by Apple, kicking off with questions about Epic's analytics." Lawyer asks, "Would it surprise you to learn that the vast majority of people who downloaded Fortnite on iOS have never made any purchase of any sort on any platform? Estimate of around 75%. So this is really funny. So the lawyer is basically, well, it says in the tweet here, lawyer is saying that only 5% of users were spending money on the App Store, is accusing Epic of punishing all the other consumers by taking a stand over in-app purchasing and refusing to come back to the App Store. And not only that, but because, as you know, that there were only about 7% of people that were actually playing Fortnite on iOS. I think the lawyer is also trying to say that it could be used as collateral because it was only 7%, but they could make a greater point about how to open that up, especially with the fact that the iOS platform has so many users anyway. So I think they've established that they're using the iOS platform to make to send a message. So Adi Robertson says, Apple citing an email Sweeney sent to Sony executive Phil Rosenberg in 2018, calling lack of crossplay an untenable position, saying it would tear kids' friendships apart and might not be legal. And he also said that Tim Sweeney said it was an existential threat to hardware in general. Lawyer notes that Epic and Apple later reached a deal for crossplay that would include potential commissions for Sony. This was discussed yesterday and wouldn't let people buy V-Bucks on other platforms and use them on PlayStation. Now, this is really interesting. This is talking about cross-wallet. So cross-wallet is where you have V-Bucks you buy on one platform and then use them on another. And because for Epic Games, it didn't matter for them because they didn't care what platform you played on, they were okay with that. But for the platform holder, for Sony, they were like, hey, you can't buy something on the Xbox platform and then come over to our platform and play, because then you're using our resources, but Microsoft gets the money. So PlayStation don't allow cross-wallet. Now, Apple is the one that do allow cross-wallet. They said they're fine with cross-wallet. So that's what the lawyer here is saying, is like, hey, how come you're not attacking Sony, but you're attacking us even though we're allowing cross-wallet? Lawyers getting at the fact that Sony and Nintendo locked down how people can spend money through Fortnite, and Epic chose to strike a deal with Sony instead of doing something like suing. Lawyer reiterates the fact that Sony and Microsoft don't have cross-wallet capabilities, while Apple does let you buy V-Bucks from elsewhere, say Epic's site through Safari on iOS. Judge jumps in. Judge asks why Epic didn't let people buy V-Bucks on his website via iOS before Project Liberty. It wasn't a very attractive option for our customers, Sweeney says. Had they even started working on it as an option, we hadn't programmed it. Lawyer is talking about why Sweeney has called mobile in-app purchases an existential issue. Sweeney goes back to his definition of Fortnite as a metaverse rather than a game. Sweeney, the long-term evolution of Fortnite will be opening up Fortnite as a platform for creators to distribute their work to users, and creators will make the majority of profits. With Apple taking 30% off the top, it makes it very hard for Apple and creators to exist in this future world. So, Epic does have a point, is like, if Apple continued to take 30%, then there's a smaller piece of the pie for Epic, especially in a world where there could be more creators down the line. So as the creator, you don't want as many middlemen and as many people taking the profits at the top, because then it makes it very hard for a lot of independent developers to survive. Think about it, like if Apple take 30%, then Epic needs to take 20% or 30%. That would leave the creator with just 50%. But on an Epic Game Store model, then Epic would take 12% and the developer would take 88%. So you see how you can't have that many number of middlemen before the final creator takes the amount of money. So I think Epic has a really strong point right here, but they need to, I guess, make a bigger issue out of that fact. And obviously, I'm not there at the court case, so I don't know how strong of a point the lawyers made. But I think that point right there, where you can't really have a society where you have that many number of middlemen, and if Epic is going to create Fortnite as a platform, and then there's a creator, and maybe there's another creator on top of another creator because there are mods and stuff, then everybody is starting to take a bit of the pie when the creator should be taking the bulk of the revenue. Our next witness is Benjamin Simon, the CEO of Yoga Buddha, which makes a yoga app. YB submitted some exhibits where customers kept emailing because they discover it's got a cheaper price outside the App Store, but it can't advertise that in-app. So that's one of the problems of the Apple App Store, is that you're not allowed to advertise outside of... So technically, you couldn't really make an app where you're selling stuff, but you're selling it on a website, that would go against the App Store. Simon scheduled for a 1-hour examination and 30-minute cross-examination for the record. Okay, compared to Tim Sweeney's 6+ hours. That's probably why we spend so much time on Tim Sweeney stuff. As we expected, Simon is laying out some well-known complaints about the App Store. You have to get updates reviewed, which delays them. You can't support refunds personally, and you can't tell users inside the app that they can sign up cheaper elsewhere. We had no ability to negotiate these terms, and we feel like we can't grow our businesses without an iOS app, Simon says of policies. Apple, in addition to prohibiting us from implementing an additional payment method, does not allow us to direct users to a separate payment method or even add a link to our website. So roughly half the users simply pay substantially more to sign up through iOS. On Android, about 10% of users use the in-app purchasing option. Why keep offering this option for a higher price on iOS? We don't feel like we have any other choice. Now we're moving to one of Apple's big talking points, that third-party payment processing introduces security risk. Lawyer asks if web signups have caused any security issues. Simon says no. And who provides a better payment processing service, Apple or Stripe? Stripe. Downdog wanted to offer a true free trial that didn't ask for subscription info instead of what Apple required, which was an auto renewal with a trial period. We don't want to make our money from users who forget to unsubscribe, says Simon. They basically just doubled down and said, no, you are in violation. Downdog tweeted a screenshot of the interaction, then Apple called and recanted. We're correct, and the guidelines didn't prevent that true free trial. They ended up offering it. I don't know if that is true about that true free trial, but essentially that's all that Adi Robertson wrote. Adi Robertson. Apple went to the Supreme Court in a big class action. Let me just click the chat there. Hello, Game Tech Gaming World. We'll get it to the chat in just a second. Apple went to the Supreme Court in a big class action case to argue developers didn't have standing to sue it for antitrust violations. The court disagreed in 2019. So I brought this up, and it doesn't have that much to do with the case, but it's funny when you actually go to the PlayStation Network store, they say exactly the same thing. So they will say something like, the user must not cannot sue us in a class action lawsuit if you want to use the PlayStation Store. And so Apple did pretty much the same thing. They put that in their terms and conditions that you can't sue them in a class action lawsuit, and the court threw it out. The Supreme Court threw that. You can't have that in your terms and conditions. Of course, people can sue you if they just want to, bring up an issue that they have with your terms and conditions or your store. So now we get to the final parts, and yes, we're finally done at 2 hours and 8 minutes. But Adi Robertson says, Patel is here to talk about Geforce Now. So I think this is Aisha Patel or Patel Aisha. Nvidia's streaming game service. Lawyers asking for a quick history of cloud gaming and explanation of its logistics. Now we're getting into some meatier stuff. Lawyer asking why Nvidia doesn't offer a native app for iOS, just a web app. Nvidia says Apple rejected it. This is tied to a broader controversy from last year. Apple put significant restrictions on cloud gaming apps, including nixing anything that seemed too much like a store within a store. Apple does not want store within a store. Apple only wants their own store on their hardware, and they want to funnel everybody through that hardware, that store. Adi Robertson says, Apple is arguing that even without a native app, iOS users are being drawn to the platform, and problems like latency and server capacity apply on both native and web experiences. Patel says, I honestly don't have the technical depth to say precisely how they manifest. So it appears like a lot of the people at the top don't really have the technical detail to say, I guess, anything about technical stuff. For Apple, it's a win if Nvidia is providing an amazing service through the Safari browser outside the App Store, obviously. Has Apple done anything to stop Nvidia from offering Geforce Now on Safari? Lawyer asks, Patel says no. And so this is tied to the bigger controversy last year where Microsoft, and as you saw Phil Spencer talking about how they were trying to get their project xCloud, which is now in their Xbox app, through the Apple App Store. So previously you weren't allowed to stream stuff. So you couldn't stream, you couldn't have an Xbox, and then you couldn't stream that to your iPhone and play the game there, because Apple felt like that was in direct competition to their games on their store, and that's why they didn't allow it. Now, technically, I'm really interested to see whether lawyers or the legal side, or how the court handles this, what is fair use. I would expect that they're going to separate this into hardware versus software, which means that in terms of Microsoft being able to have an app, I would say that they're going to rule on the fact that yes, Microsoft can have an app that allows them to stream their own games. If they didn't do that, they would effectively be saying that every platform can be closed. And I think we're moving to a position where you have to separate the hardware and the software. It ultimately depends on where you lie in that situation. And ultimately, Tim Sweeney is betting that everybody is thinking that you have to separate hardware and software. I think that might be it of all of the screens that I was going to present. And so that's probably it. That is probably it for the Epic and Apple court case for the time being. Now, that was just a couple of days worth of information. So if I went through the day 3 stuff, that would probably take another half an hour. And I'm not really prepared for that because that just finished about a couple of hours ago. So I'm not really prepared to talk about that stuff. I haven't prepared myself, I should say. So I will stick around for another 10-15 minutes if you guys have any questions. There's only 3 people